let's look at the American College of Radiology's RADS assessment of the transition zone. Now, this is a great start. It's not perfect, just like any grading system. You're going to have to do a little bit of creative thinking here, and I'm sure this is going to be recast and developed as time goes on, as will the peripheral zone. But we are leading with the T2 character on a fast spin echo image, as opposed to the peripheral zone, where the DWI was the trumper. Here, the trumper, if you play bridge, is the T2 morphology and character. We're going to look at two easy categories, the 1 and the 5. The 1, homogeneous intermediate signal intensity in the transitional zone, TZ, or central region of the prostate. Doesn't matter what the diffusion character is or the DCE contrast enhanced MRI is. Then we've got a 5. In a PIRADS 5, the T2 score corresponds to a greater than 1.5 centimeter area. We'll call this the central region or TZ of the prostate. We have this very charcoal-like smearing effect that may cross boundaries. It may cross capsules. It may invade the neurovascular bundle, and it's equal to or really greater than 1.5 centimeters in size, usually close to 2 centimeters in size. It doesn't matter what the diffusion character or the DCE MRI shows in these two circumstances. So a 1 and a 5 are easy. A 4 is also easy. A 4 is the same as a 5, except the lesion is just simply smaller. It's equal to, but really under, 1.5 centimeters in size, with that charcoal-like, erasure-like smearing phenomenon crossing boundaries. How about a 2? A 2 is pretty easy. A 2 is simply, within the prostate gland, you have well-encapsulated nodularity. Now, those nodules, it is said, are gray or intermediate, but in my experience, those nodules can be heterogeneous or even very, very bright. If it's a very bright nodule, they don't enhance. So that's another helpful little tool that's not really listed here. Bright nodules are almost always cold. If you start to see a bright nodule that's bigger and irregular and it enhances or has some nodular enhancement, you may have to worry about the rare mucinous tumor. However, that's really exceptional. So well-defined nodules in the TZ, or central region of the prostate, with any diffusion character, with any DCE MRI, with the exception that I just mentioned. You know, early enhancement associated with a bright nodule, got to worry a little bit, but typically bright nodules and gray nodules, encapsulation is key. So that leads us to the toughie, the PIRADS 3. Now, in a PIRADS 3, the T2 criteria is heterogeneous signal intensity, ill-defined margins, doesn't cross boundaries like the surgical or anatomic capsule, and it basically doesn't fit into a 2, a 1, a 4, or a 5. So if you have this scenario, now the diffusion-weighted criteria kick in. If the diffusion-weighted criteria are a 5, in other words, there is a greater than 1.5 centimeter area of diffusion restriction that is bright as you go up with the B-value and is dark on the ADC map and is well-defined and very hypointense, then this tweener scenario now becomes a PIRADS 4. If the diffusion characteristics are more mild, then you're at a PIRADS 3. So now you're probably thinking to yourself, well, what if the DWI scoring is a 4? That's a tough scenario. Now, even though the ACR lists DCE MRI as any, this is a scenario where I rely, personally, more heavily on the DCE MRI characteristics. If this scenario is cold, then I'm very comfortable calling it a 3. Or if this scenario is mildly enhancing with a progressive rise, I'm comfortable calling it a PIRADS 3. However, if it's very hyperintense early on, I usually move it up a bit to a PIRADS 4, or I survey it much more carefully or are more aggressive in reading this scenario with early enhancement, but otherwise the enhancement is not that reliable in the central region or TZ of the prostate gland. So that's a summary of the TZ or central region of the prostate gland as it relates to synthesizing the different parameters, noting that the T2 is dominant and trumps some of these other criteria in most cases.